Coming up next on Locked On NBA Draft with No Ceilings, Nate Ament, top 5, or are we getting ahead of ourselves? That's up next.
You are Locked On NBA Draft with No Ceilings, your daily podcast on the future stars of the NBA, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
How are we doing, boys and girls? It's the Locked On NBA Draft podcast with No Ceilings. I'm Tyler Rucker, the conductor of chaos with the draft space, and I'm joined by the mad scientist, Mr. Tyler Metcalf. Metcalf, how are we doing?
Rucker, fantastic. Little change of roles today, but we continue to dive into these high school players, really getting prepped for next year's class, and very, very exciting times.
Just want to remind everybody that today's episode is brought to you by FanDuel. Football season's around the corner, folks, so make sure you visit the FanDuel app today. Start planning your future bets. Let's have some fun out there. All right, Metcalf, I wanted to talk to you about a couple prospects. We've been doing these scouting reports, previews, kind of talking about the guys that are drawing some buzz. And I was like, hey, we need to talk about Nate Ament. Now, for everyone that doesn't know, Nate Ament, talented forward, number 4 in ESPN's high school rankings. He's been generating a lot of buzz. A lot of people think he could be a top 5 pick in this stacked class that everyone's saying, hey, it's a 3-headed monster. And then you get Nate Ament. And it's like, okay, well, let's pump the brakes a little bit. So I wanted to talk to you, and what were your first kind of takeaways from Nate Ament, and what are you thinking about him for the upcoming season?
Yeah, and we're gonna have I'm really excited for this episode because we got some comps, we got defense, offense, all that good stuff. And when the natural inclination when we look at high school players like Ament is always, oh man, 6'9", 6'10", toolsy wing. Everyone's immediate comp is like, oh, he's Kevin Durant. It's like, no, he's not. He's never Kevin Durant. It's never, ever, ever, ever Kevin Durant. And that's the case with Ament now, for me at least. We saw him at Hoop Summit in person. I was a little more impressed with him there than you guys were, and then he was awful in the game. It's like, if you told me that he actually never played, be like, all right, that makes sense. Complete no-show in the game, but I was a little more encouraged with what he was showing throughout the week in practice, and then just diving back through all of his high school film. I came away really concerned, and mainly with the offensive end of the floor, which I was not surprised or was not expecting.
Yeah, for everyone, we're getting you caught up. We and Metcalf are trying to be better about this. So for if you're new, Nate Ament's around 6'9". I think he's listed around 190, but it's like, hey, let's prove it. He's very thin. Beautiful shot from outside. He's going to Tennessee, one of their big time recruits. He was one of the, I want to say one of the last big recruits to kind of announce his decision. So yeah, he's going to Tennessee. Shout out Rocky Top. It'll be really interesting. Going to go play, for Rick Barnes. We all know how that could go. Just because I think it's a talented coach that demands a lot of their players, especially. And let's start offensively. We've done a lot of these previews to start the year. We've done offense, defense, and then everyone's favorite, the player comp section. So let's talk about the offense. I have the same questions, but I want to hear first. What are you taking in the positive side? We always try to spin this in a positive way for these guys. So what were your positive takeaways from Ament? And you can't say nothing. You have to give me some realistic stuff here.
No, I'm definitely not at nothing. I think there's some real upside for him as a spot-up shooter, off-ball shooter. He showed a little bit of movement stuff, but he had the ball so much in his hands where it's like, I'm not sure how real that necessarily is, but as like a spot-up guy, I think he's got very real range, high release point. I like his outside shot, especially when he's on platform in a standstill, that kind of stuff. I also think there's some fun passing upside too. I think he sees the floor well. Those long strides, he's able to get into the lane and then attract some defensive help. And it popped a little more at Hoop Summit where he was able to keep his dribble alive in traffic a little better than he was in high school. So hopefully that's a development that we're going to see carry over into his freshman year. But in those situations, I thought there was some really fun passing upside with his vision, selflessness, that kind of stuff. So I think those situations for him to get into the paint are also going to become a little easier for him in that off-ball role, especially if that spot-up jumper is a real threat. He draws those long closeouts. Now he's attacking rotating defenses and is able to create for himself in an off-ball capacity in situations that are way more simple and less arduous than in a non-ball sense.
He's going to be a fascinating one. There's a lot of fans out there that are very passionate about him, and I wanted to get to this point with you, Metcalf, before I turn, a little bit more negative. So for everyone that's getting caught up, it's going to be Darren Peterson going to Kansas, AJ DeBonsa going to BYU, and Cam Boozer going to Duke is the three names you're going to hear all year, because those are the ones that are billed as potential superstars. Those are the heavy hitters in this class of like, they could all go number one in a different class, but they're all on this one. My question for you, Metcalf, is watching Nate Ament, because we're watching those guys and comparing him and trying to be like, wait, look at how good these guys are. People are trying to mention you in the same conversation. So are we like kind of grading him at a harder curve, if you want to say it that way? Or is it just there's more you're watching and you're like, no, I have bigger questions. You know what I'm trying to say? Like, because I
definitely.
You get beer goggles in a way of watching those top three guys, and then you're like, wait a sec, what was I just watching before? This doesn't look the same.
Yeah, absolutely. But if he's going to get mentioned in top 5 conversations, those are his peers now.
Right.
Like those are the guys that we should be comparing him to. And I think they're leagues apart. Like, I don't think they're even in the same stratosphere. I was really, really, really concerned with how much Ament struggled to create anything on ball. He gets pushed off his spots really easily. His ability to keep his dribble alive in those situations improved, but there's some fun up and under footwork stuff in the mid range to create little floaters, but he doesn't create any space. He doesn't create anything easy for him. He was really good against Prolific Prep back in January, but Darren Peterson wasn't guarding him then because they're different positions. When he played AJ DeBonsa, AJ bullied him. It was night and day in terms of these guys as players and what they were able to create off the bounce and for themselves and in isolation. So it's like, I think there are some very real routes to Ament being a really good pro, really good at Tennessee. And there's a lot of aspects that I really am intrigued about with and excited about with his game. But I don't think he's this type of 6'9", 6'10", toolsy wing on ball creator. I don't think he's that. If he was, he would be, for me, top 5 lock almost already. But I think he is so far away from that because he's not very physical. He doesn't have a great first step. There's almost no burst to his game. And creating anything on ball was just so difficult for him.
Look, I always try to be positive. We always try to do is be positive about guys. But watching his film, I got uneasy. I was like, hey, if I'm at DEFCON 5 with everyone in the draft, like with a man, I'm at DEFCON 4. Is that the one where you're like, hey, I'm getting a little aware. I'm a little nervous now of like, we're on alert. I feel like watching his tape of the weaknesses of how much I thought there still needs to be development in some areas. I was like, we got a long road here, longer than I thought. I think there's just more rawness with his game. The foot speed. I know how tall he is and how much ground he can cover. It takes a while for him to cover that ground. It takes a while. It's like a sports car that you have to, or an old car that you have to like wait for it to heat up to get going. It's like, okay, like you mentioned that game with AJ. AJ's sliding defensively to cut him off before he's even making his move. So it's the processing. This happens with a lot of these stretched forwards that can shoot it. It's like, hey, they might be a player that takes a while to develop their game completely, which is fine. But I just feel getting him in this top 5 conversation is a little rich for me right now. Things can change. We always see that. But for me, I just have more questions. Was there anything else, Metcalf, with the offense that you wanted to kind of bring to the table or anything that caught your eye?
And just to put one more point on how much he struggled to create on ball. And it's not like he was at Prolific or Columbus or Montverde where they're playing nothing but teams loaded with top 5. Like he was at Highland High School in Virginia. No shade to Highland, but they're different leagues. And he was playing some really tough competition. like AJ and Darren, where he struggled to create on ball, but he also, like, those same struggles showed up when he was playing Broughton from North Carolina. And there's no one in this class who's a top 100 recruit who went to Broughton. Again, no shade at those schools or programs, but it's when we're talking about a guy being a top 5 pick, a potential top 5 pick, I need him to be able to create an easy jumper or get to the lane with ease against Broughton. And we didn't see that at all. I was just really surprised with how slow and mechanical he was getting into his shots, trying to create space. And like you mentioned with AJ, Buzz, everyone who defended him almost seemed to know like where he was going almost before he did, and was consistently beating him to the spots that he was trying to get to.
Yeah, and when we're talking about these guys, for everyone, we might get some Tennessee Vols fans listening. Like, come on, what are these guys? They're haters. I think it's more of just, I'm saying there's a longer road to go than making a one and done jump and being ready for the NBA. Like, I feel like it's like, hey, he needs to develop a lot more in his game. Maybe he's a sophomore leap guy. Time's going to tell us. He's still incredibly talented. I still think this is a lottery pick. I'm just saying, in a class with so much firepower, I'm not sold on the top 5, like slam dunk. It's going to happen. I think there's more questions we have to see if it develops. So, Metcalf, we're going to take a quick break, and then we're going to talk about defense, because we know you love to talk about defense. So we'll see, and Tennessee fans are going to be like, hey, can we get some positivity? We'll find out. August 26th is officially FanDuel Futures Day, a brand new holiday for football fans who live for bold predictions and preseason hunches. For just 24 hours, FanDuel is giving you deals on NFL season predictions. So whether you're calling your MVP, eyeing a long shot division winner, or ready to crown your Super Bowl champ before week 1 even kicks off, this is your moment. Crown your champion in August. Me, personally, I'm a big Minnesota Vikings fan. Easiest bet in the world. Lock. Gonna win the NFC North. Visit the FanDuel app today and start planning your futures bets now, because Futures Day is one day and one day only. FanDuel, play your game. If you're running a business, you know that every missed call is money left on the table. Think about the last time you had an urgent need, maybe for a plumber or a service provider. If the first person didn't answer, did you wait? Probably not. You moved on. That's why you need OpenPhone. OpenPhone is the #1 business phone system built to streamline and scale your customer communications, all from an app on your phone or computer. OpenPhone lets me manage business calls and text from a single app. Sometimes when I want to talk to all of my No Ceilings guys and I don't want to have to text each of them differently, OpenPhone's there. OpenPhone is offering my listeners 20% off your first 6 months at openphone.com/lockedonnba. That's OPENPHONE.com/lockedonnba. And if you have existing numbers with another service, OpenPhone will port them over at no extra charge. OpenPhone, no missed calls, no missed customers. All right, Metcalf, we're back, and I want to talk about the defense. Let's just rip the Band-Aid off. How did you feel?
I liked it.
Oh, here we go. Yeah. I wasn't ready for this. All right.
So watching him on the offensive end of the floor, my thought process was Rick Barnes is never going to play this dude. We're not going to see him until he's 25. And then you watch him on defense, and it's like, oh, Rick Barnes might actually play this dude because he defends. At least I enjoyed a lot of the defense. He's skinny. He's going to get bullied. He's going to get out leveraged a lot. But I really enjoyed the way he slid his feet. I think there's some legit stuff as like a weak side rim protector there. I think he's a smart, competitive defender who wants to defend. I saw that kind of desire, making multiple rotations, but the way that he would sit down in his stance and really slide his feet with guys, I thought was incredibly encouraging. And then even when the quicker guys beat him off the dribble, he still has that length to recover that a lot of guys don't have, because he is 6'9", 6'10" in that range. So I came away really, really encouraged with the defense.
See, I kind of went back and forth. I feel there's parts of his game where you can completely tell that he's more comfortable, he's more relaxed. And then there's other parts where you feel like he's predetermining a lot of stuff. He's waiting, a little slow to react. I think defensively showed some comfort. it's just going to be one of those players. I'm the most fascinated this year, probably most patient to see how everything progresses, because I was watching him offensively, felt the same way when it came to like, hey, Rick Barnes is going to hate some of these decisions. And then all of a sudden defensively, like, okay, Rick might have to play him. And he is gigantic. I know he's listed at 6'9". He looks bigger. And if the physicality is really what's going to, I think, hold me back from being all in, because I'm like, how comfortable are you going to be able to adjust to the physicality? Do you have those concerns with his frame, like more on defense, more on offense, or how do you feel?
Honestly, probably more on offense. It's gonna show it's gonna show up a lot on defense, especially in the SEC. I'm fascinated to see if they try and play him at the 4. I don't think that's going to go well. I think he's a solid rebounder, but also in the high school level, I think a lot of that is due to just his height and his length. I didn't see him necessarily throwing bodies around and boxing out and moving guys on the boards, but he's generally in the right spot at the right time. But against SEC bigs, especially with the transfer portal and some of these guys being 22, 23 years old, they're going to be able to move him effortlessly, and that is going to be a problem. But I think he defends with his chest enough. I think he moves his feet and stays in position enough where he'll be able to negate some of that. But there'll probably also be a handful of times where he gets buried in the post, and a senior center just backs him down and puts him on a poster.
So you brought up something that was going to be like literally my next question. So this is great. I love this. I'm still figuring out this hosting thing. It's funny talking to you and you're answering the questions now. For everyone, it's usually the other way around. But me and Metcalf are trying to spice things up. I wanted to ask you about his projection at the next level. Not comps yet. We're not at that section. Yep. But you mentioned, hey, I think he's going to struggle to be a 4 in the SEC. I think he's going to struggle to be a 3. So what I'm trying to get at is, like, I don't know. I think when I'm watching him, I'm like, I don't see this surviving as a 3, saying everything goes well at the NBA level. I just don't see it. So is this going to be a weird tweener where we're like, hey, you almost got to try to play a quote small ball with him at the 4, even though he's got the size to play there height wise? Where do you feel like, as I struggle offensively to think he's quick enough right now. Now he's young, guys. Everyone calm down. He's young. He could grow his body. He could develop some muscle, be more physical. But that's what I just wanted to ask you. Like, do you see him long-term as a 4? Do you think he could be quick enough to play the 3?
College, I think ideally you would want him at the 4. And if you have the size to play him at the 3, I think that'd be incredible. Because you'd be one of the biggest teams in the country. I think NBA, he's going to have to be a 3, if not a 2. I don't think he could survive as a 4 in the NBA, at least not for a couple of years. I think it's going to take some time. I didn't think his frame was bad necessarily when we saw him in person. But it also didn't scream, oh, this dude's about to add 30 pounds of muscle in the next couple of years. So I think he's always going to be kind of leaner and on that end of the spectrum. But Tennessee is going to be an awesome data point in terms of, not to sound cliche, but what do those intangibles really look like when you're not the guy and you're playing Broughton and you're able to shoot over guys and you're just bigger than everyone out there inherently? What does it look like when someone's putting you on your butt and sending you into the first row with a drop step and lowering their shoulder and showing you grown man strength? I think that's going to be really, really fascinating. I think, I think his defensive fundamentals and all of that are where they need to be at this point, at his size, at his age. And I'm generally really encouraged by it. And I think the fact that he chose Tennessee and Rick Barnes tells me that he wants to be awesome on that end of the floor as well. But at the same time, he's really skinny and he just doesn't have the strength yet.
It is one thing to be skinny. It is one thing to, like you mentioned, we saw him in person, and it's one thing to have the thin frame, but look like, hey, there's weight to put on here. And when I saw him, I agree with you. When I saw him in person, I was like, I'm not convinced there's a ton of room here to work with. So that's kind of just my biggest questions moving forward. also seeing him in person and we saw him at Nike Hoop Summit, and then seeing his tape, going back and watching it, I was like, man, I felt like he was more smoother in person.
Mhm.
On tape, it looked like things were just a little robotic of like, where do I go now? Like undecisiveness, I guess, is the point. That can come along, maybe another role.
Yeah, so
More
real quick,
spacing could be better. No, go ahead.
sorry to cut you off, but like to follow up on that, more of a philosophy process thing, because at least for me, a lot of the times, like when we go to Hoop Summit, is the first time I'm seeing most of those guys outside of the top couple names. Like Ament, that was the first time I saw him,
Right.
and now I'm going back and watching stuff from 5-6 months before that that leads up to that event, and
Right.
it looks different. So how do you scale that difference of, oh man, this stuff on tape looks so different? Are you more encouraged that, oh, he grew into this, or are you like, where was the disconnect?
I think you get more encouraged because that's why it's so important to go and have your checkups and have your notes. I think you get more encouraged because you're like, wait a second, this doesn't match what I just saw,
Yeah.
what you're saying 5 or 6 months later. So if anything, I think that's why you're making note of like, well, let's wait and see. Like now you gotta check up on him again. And maybe that's where the rapid progression's coming with his game of middle of the year. This is a guy that's on the climb. We talked about this in the Darren Peterson episode. Like this is the guy that is climbing. The trajectory is pointing straight up now, not just a little curve. It's going up. So maybe that's the late rush with Ament, why people and scouts were getting so intrigued. But just watching the tape, I was like, man, I felt like he was smoother than this. I felt like there was more, I didn't see the forcing on both sides of the ball. It seems like offensively, especially, there was a lot of force, and like I was like, hey, okay, I didn't see this in person. So the playmaking, I understand what you're saying, but it's just one of those, I'm in a wait and see mode. And that's why I was joking earlier of like, oh, at DEFCON 4, it's like, you're on high alert now. You're trying to watch out and be like, okay, let's see how this looks early on, but you don't feel as comfortable. Does that make sense?
Yeah, absolutely.
Do you feel the same with that, Metcalf?
Yeah, and I always just have to constantly remind myself of, all right, the timeline of events. Like where does this fall in place? And like, hey, Hoop Summit was after all of this. McDonald's is after all of this. So when I do see him struggle with physicality and keeping his dribble alive in space, I'm like, well, I saw him do that a lot throughout practice against some of the best high schoolers in the country. Like, what? It's like, oh yeah, because the game I'm watching was in mid-November, and we saw him in early April. A lot happens in that time in terms of development and growth for 17 and 18-year-olds. So
we've seen that with a lot of guys. VJ Edgecombe last year, we saw that, like how quickly things can develop. So, all right, Metcalf, take our last break, and then everyone's favorite thing, NBA comps. So that's what you're here for. We'll be right back. We have an important request. Locked On wants to hear from you. Yes, you, the fans. We put together a survey to learn more about our listeners and make your favorite podcast even better. This is your chance to tell us what you like, what you don't, and answer questions about our advertising. Go on to lockedonpodcast.com/survey to get started. Everyone who completes the survey will be entered for a chance to win one of 10 $100 Amazon gift cards. Again, that's lockedonpodcast.com/survey. You can find the link in the show notes, and thank you all for helping us out. Okay, Metcalf, the moment that everyone shows up for. Kidding and jokes aside, let's talk about some NBA comps. And we talk about this all the time. These are not one-to-one comparisons. We like to do the vibes of who he reminds us of. So what are some names for you when you look at Nate Ament?
It's really tough.
Off to a good start. Off to a great start. No,
because I went into the film dive thinking he was one thing and coming out thinking he's probably something entirely different.
Mm-hmm.
And I have some negative ones. We'll save those. We'll start out positive. The one that I hope he shows us this year is Jaden McDaniels, where coming out of high school, McDaniels at one point was the number one player in his class. He was considered the classic. The next Kevin Durant. Again, friendly reminder: these guys are never Kevin Durant.
There's one Kevin Durant.
But he was this shifty kind of on-ball creator, high release point, promising shot. And then he got to Washington and all of that went out the window. And it's like, oh, could this dude be a nasty defender? And that's what he's grown into with the Timberwolves. So that's kind of my hope and how I've had to reposition how I view Ament of like, is this guy actually more of like, if he really buys in on the defensive end of the floor, could we get a more of a Jaden McDaniels, Jonathan Isaac type of outcome with him where the defense ends up being his real calling card, and then he's able to provide some complementary offensive skill sets in terms of play finishing, connective passing, spot up shooting, attacking closeouts, and that kind of stuff.
Yeah, because he could shoot. He can really shoot it. So if we could get a supercharged 3-and-D, that's where I get excited. My biggest point, and hopefully we still have some diehard Nate Ament fans with us. My biggest point from earlier is like the top 5. Whenever I'm taking someone in the top 5, I'm thinking like, oh man, this is a potential franchise altering piece.
Yeah.
With Ament, I still like him as a top 10 lottery guy. I would like him as your second or third option. Like if you could get a stretched out floor spacer with defensive upside, that gets me really excited. If you could tell me we get Jaden McDaniels with a better shot, but less of the defensive lockdown, I'd be like, oh man, that's really exciting. I would want that in the top 10. So I like that one. I like the Jonathan Isaac shout out. I think that was a little underrated. You slipped that one in there.
Yeah, and I was trying to just come up with, and again, I'm staying positive here. For all the haters, don't worry, I got plenty in the tank for that too. But like if everything goes right for Ament, I think there's some very realistic outcomes where he could be that fringe all NBA defensive type of player. And then it's how real is the shot? How much does the handle improve? What does the strength and athletic development look like? And it'd have to be a lot, but those, there are lean, lanky defenders who are able to guard across the floor and really compete at a high level on that end of the floor. And if I'm being optimistic for Ament, I think that's more towards where I'm leaning than hoping he develops into a Kevin Durant, Brandon Ingram, DeMar DeRozan type of offensive creator.
Completely agree. I'm gonna cheat with mine. I had an NBA scout tell me that Nate Ament reminds them of Matas Buzelis, and I can't get that one out of my head. But I think he's a lot skinnier and doesn't play as tough as Buzelis did with that same young frame. So it's going to be interesting for me. But you said you had some negative ones. Let's rip the Band-Aid off. I can't get Patrick Baldwin out of my head. I threw
that one to the group chat.
Yeah, I can't get
that
Michael Porter Jr. Anyone on that trajectory. I'm just like, this is what I'm seeing right now.
I'm like, I think there's a very real world where he ends up being Patrick Baldwin Jr. I don't think it's totally unrealistic. He ends up more like Jalen McDaniels and Jaden, where he's just kind of this fringe NBA player bouncing around the league, medium tier, like a Chris Boucher type of player. But Chris Boucher is a nice player. But if you're taking him in the top 5, you're going to be kind of bummed about it. So
it's a tough one, folks. Like it's a tough. I'm not trying to be a hater, but I understand where Metcalf's struggling. Like I was excited to get pumped up, and I came away from my film dive like, man, I'm uncomfortable. I think that's the biggest one. Like I'm uncomfortable right now, like with this one. Like you don't know where to go because like even earlier in the show, me saying like, hey, he could be a sophomore guy. I'm like, he's not going to be a sophomore guy. He's going to be a one and done because teams are going to buy into like, the potential.
Would it shock you if he's just like John Butler 2.0?
Yeah, because I think he's got a little bit more offensive game with the shot. He has a good
John Butler is a nasty shooter at Florida State.
Yeah, I never bought John Butler. I don't know. It's a tough one. There's a lot of things that need to happen. Way more things need to fall in place than I thought. He has a couple good. His game needs to be vanilla this year. I think at Tennessee, he has a couple good moves. But if he has to make a second, like if he has to make a counter, I see he runs into trouble. He can really get in trouble if he has to like counter you and be quick with his like one and done when it comes to like, oh, cross and get downhill. He's great. But I think there's just some questions.
Yeah, and I really think we talk about this all the time, but how underrated NBA ready strength is, how
Yes.
important that is, because the only way that 99% of these guys get better is by playing. And if you're not strong enough to hold up, and you go to, if you're not strong enough to hold up, there's probably one or two locations that you're going to go to actually get minutes. And those are the top three teams in picking in the draft. And if you fall to 7, 8, 9, 10, those teams are looking to make that leap into the playoffs. So if they have a physically deficient, that sounds more dramatic than I meant it to, rookie on their team, their opportunities are going to be slim. So those, you're not going to be able to learn and catch up to the speed and physicality. I'm just going back to the 2022 draft. Like Ousmane Dieng obviously is on a loaded team, but that switch has never really flipped. Nikola Jovic went late first round, kind of a similar player. We're starting to see that physical development finally, but he also went to the Heat, and there's optimism there. But these type of really lanky guys, like, who don't fully buy into the defensive end and really experience a drastic strength improvement, like Zaire Williams. Franz Wagner was kind of like that coming out of his freshman season and then went back for a second year, and we saw him bulk up in a big way at Michigan. Trey Murphy III really took time to grow. He obviously also had a huge growth spurt after like his freshman or sophomore year. But those types of players, it's really, really tough. So while I do think there are some realistic routes for him to be an awesome 3-and-D emphasis on the defense type of wing, I think there are about 10 times as many scenarios where it could go really the wrong direction pretty quickly.
Completely agree. All right, Metcalf, we'll wrap this one up with the Native Men Hour. So everyone, thank you for joining us, for joining the Locked On NBA Draft podcast with no ceilings. We'll have plenty of great shows coming this week with the rest of the crew and all year. This is what we do. We talk about these guys, but thank you for joining us. Thanks for making Locked On your first listen every day, and we will see you guys next time.